Hello, my name is Chris Goodnight. I'm a Master of Business student at Fayetteville State University, enrolled in a business class fall semester 2016. Today I'll be rebutting myself about moral relativism and multinational corporations and debating that moral relativism really doesn't work well um, in absolute terms when dealing with multinational corporation management in foreign lands. Chris did a nice job introducing the topic, and you know I do agree that nationally it's a little bit easier to follow the established rules and guidelines, laws. Um, they're more self-evident and more culturally acceptable and commonplace, so that um, corporations that national corporations that venture from moral or culturally acceptable behaviors are more readily identified, and hopefully the amoral activity is remedied. So cultural, or I'm sorry, moral relativism, believing that the individual chooses what's right and wrong, and there's no set standard of right and wrong, really that doesn't have a place in the corporate world, because it can lead to market disasters. Much like 2008 stock market crash in the United States, one could argue that the business members involved with the crash were practicing moral relativism. They were practicing economics in a way that they chose what was right and wrong. And Antonio Argandona, in his paper about three ethical dimensions of a financial crisis, articulates very well that you can't separate economics and ethics, that they're intricately related. And if you practice moral relativism, creating your own set of standards, your own set of moral, culturally accepted behaviors, that it can be catastrophic to an economy and create devastating results. Argandona goes on to say that ethics has three dimensions: personal, organizational, and social. The solution to the problems created by the crisis demands an ethical response at all three levels. People should be ethical. Organizations must act in accordance with ethics, and society should behave ethically. And if you practice moral relativism, there is no absolute moral truth. Then it allows you to practice your business or your life or your society outside of acceptable rules, and it creates chaos. And as in 2008, that's partly what caused the market crash, in my belief. One more national point about moral relativism and how I don't believe it works, and talk about a recent article that I read about with Swift and Company. They're a meatpacking plant, multi-billion-dollar plant, and the work there is tough, and they practice moral relativism by substandard hiring practices. They actually allowed illegal immigrants to work in their plants. They even taught them how to prepare false documentation so that they could be employed. And this depressed the wages for this market, promoted unsafe working conditions and unfair practices. And then ICE came in, and they actually, they sued the company and stop this practice. So moral relativism, when you can believe that what you do is right based on what you think is right, causes some market chaos, and it's just not. I don't believe in it. And to move on to the topic of this discussion, the multinational corporations and moral relativism. In the Harvard Business Review, Thomas Donaldson did a very nice article on the values, intention, ethics away from to talk about several corporations, multinational corporations, and how they deal with the mores of those societies, and how they intertwine American values, American corporate values with international corporate values. One instance is with Levi Strauss. They had an an international plant in a company, in a country that the wages were very depressed and working conditions were horrible. And so Levi Strauss talked to the owners of this international company, the branch of it, and said, if you don't improve workers' conditions, then we're going to terminate our contract with you. And that's what Levi Strauss did. They stood up to the moral standards of that they believed in. And even though that country allowed those type of labor practices, it was commonplace, Levi Strauss did not condone it, and in fact terminated the contract. And they did the moral right thing. Their moral standing was appropriate, so they did not practice moral relativism. And Donaldson goes on to state that companies must be guided by three guiding principles: respect for core human values, which determine the absolute moral threshold for all business activities; respect for local traditions; and the belief that context matters when deciding what is wrong and right. He goes on to talk about the Union Carbide tragedy in Bhopal, India, where Union Carbide didn't hold up to their standards and maintain appropriate level of supervision for that very dangerous plant producing toxic chemicals. They allowed there were no expatriates in the corporation, and the plant accident, and thousands of people died as a result. Another point about moral relativism and making the correct moral choice, and how difficult it can be in international arenas. Thomas Dunphy coined a term, moral free space. He calls this a gray zone, a zone in which there are no tight prescriptions for a company's behavior. And that means the managers must really chart their own courses, but they just can't violate core human values. And moral relativism doesn't really have a core moral value standing. And so just practicing without moral relativism could cause some serious poor decisions to be made. While I agree that there are no absolute perfect moral rules and guidelines that everyone can accept, moral relativity doesn't work because it allows for your actions to be justified simply by the fact that you say that's what you believe, and you just go with that. No place in business, nationally or internationally, for moral relativism. It leads to many disasters. And Robin Schumer does a nice job summing up why moral relativism doesn't work. Schumacher says, in the end, the moral relativist has no satisfying answer in his or her attempt to respond to the question of if there is anything wrong with anything and why outside of his opinion. There is no standard to turn to and no authority to recognize it and respect it. So I believe, in my opinion, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is a nice standard for morally upstanding beliefs, and that all companies, all corporations, all people should reflect on the Declaration of Human Rights to help guide decision making. Thank you.